this is my woodblock printing workflow. If you're beginning in printmaking, or doing it for the first time on your own outside of a classroom environment, you'll need to make some decisions about your workflow. What will you need? A palette, newspaper, a brayer, a palette knife. If you have a printing press, that helps, but you don't need one. And a large table or wire rack to lay out your prints as you make them. And of course you'll need the woodblock itself. In this case I'm doing a 2-color woodblock print with both plates carved into the same block. And as you can see, there are 1-inch wide valleys around each of the plates. These will help me line up the paper so that the 2 plates will be registered to each other and line up perfectly on the paper. So let's begin with the first plate, and I'll quickly run through the workflow. You'll ink up your brayer, apply ink to the plate, lay the paper face down on the plate, and here I'm lining it up along the edge of that valley, and then run it through the printing press. And I inspect each print before laying it down amongst the other prints. Ink up again, align the paper again, and send it through the press. Moving on to the second plate. So once all the prints were dry, a few weeks later, I decided to print the second plate using black. And this is oil-based relief printing ink. I mix up the ink to soften it. And then carefully apply it to the plate. I align it to the valley, but this paper is also very easy to line up because it's so thin that it's almost see-through. And then I'll run this through the printing press and pull my first print. I'm applying newspaper here because the rice paper is so thin that the ink is bleeding through it, and I don't want to stain my pressure blanket. Run a string across the room and attach clothespins. If your paper is light, as these are, then when you attach it to the clothespin, it will flop over like this. So to avoid this, I recommend attaching the clothespin to the paper and then attaching the clothespin to the string using a second clothespin. Before we go over cleanup, I want to show you the other colors that I printed this day, so that I can show you how I integrate experimentation into my workflow. I started with red, pulling just a small amount from the can with my palette knife. Now to produce a more medium red, I'm going to add yellow. And then add titanium white in order to make it more opaque. I end up with a very vivid dark red. I produced a line of about 10 of these red prints and experimented with different amounts of red and yellow. In this case, using a lot more yellow, emphasizing the orange in her hair. I'll show you more of these at the end of the video, but now let's focus on cleaning up our workstation. You'll need a kneaded eraser, a palette knife, odorless mineral spirits or paint thinner, newspaper, paper towels or toilet paper, and an old rag that you don't care about. First thing I do is send the block through the printing press with scrap paper. I do this multiple times, and with each pass, more ink is removed from the surface. I then continue cleaning using a kneaded eraser, dabbing the surface to pick up more ink. I then apply some Gamsol, or odorless mineral spirits, and finish off with a paper towel. I then scrape my palette with a palette knife, and if you're concerned about wasting ink, I invite you to stay tuned to the end of the video. I'll show you something you can do with your excess. I'll then add Gamsol to the palette and dissolve the ink using a paper towel. I'll then do a second pass with more Gamsol, and don't forget to wipe down the edges of your palette. I then apply Gamsol to the brayer and dissolve the ink by rolling it across the surface of newspaper. Then applying Gamsol to the roller, I'll wipe it down with paper towels. And then I'll do the same with my cloth rag. If you're doing this on newspaper, some of the ink from the paper will attach itself to your roller while it's wet with paint thinner. So make sure to wipe it down one last time for good measure. Make sure your hands are clean, and you're done. Just to show you some of the prints that I made, this was my first pass, and you can see that there either wasn't enough ink on the plate or there wasn't enough pressure on the press. This one's a little better, but you can see that it's misaligned, and you can see that white line at the top of her hair. This one's perfect, it's aligned, there was enough ink, enough pressure, came out perfectly. And then we have this series of reds, sometimes applying more ink, sometimes applying less to get more transparency. And then we have the series of prints with a more orange tone in the red. Okay, now as promised, I want to show you what you can do with your excess ink when you're cleaning your palette. You'll always have ink left over when you're done. There's nothing you can do to avoid that. So I like to apply this excess ink to my brayer, more or less at random. And then I roll this out onto a piece of paper. As a result, you get these interesting little designs, and while this may be no great work of art, it is fun to look at, and I like bringing them to street fairs and showing them to people because it's a good icebreaker in talking about the printmaking process. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this. I hope you learned something or were inspired to think about your own workflow. If you have any ideas, leave them down in the comments, and remember to like and subscribe.